My name is George. I am 67 years old. I have rough hands from years of hard work. I wake up early every morning, even now, even when there is no factory to go to, no workers waiting for me, no deliveries to approve. Old habits don't die easy, but on the morning I am about to tell you about, I did something that made everyone in that room go completely silent. I signed a document, and when my best friend of 40 years saw my signature on that paper, the man who had been secretly moving my money, piece by piece, for 3 years, he smiled. He actually smiled. He thought he had one. He thought I didn't know. Pause. Music softens. But let me take you back. Because this story doesn't start with betrayal. It starts with friendship, real friendship, the kind you think can never be broken. And then it breaks. I met Raymond Cole when we were both 20, 6 years old. We were young, hungry, broke, and full of dreams. I had just arrived in the city from a small town in Ohio, with $200 in my pocket and one suitcase. Raymond was working at a shipping dock, loading boxes at night, and selling sandwiches from a cooler during the day. We lived in the same apartment building on the 4th floor. He was in 4B. I was in 4C. The walls were thin. I could hear him talking on the phone some nights, telling his mother not to worry, that things were going to get better. I used to sit by my window and eat crackers and cheese for dinner and tell myself the same thing. We became friends the way poor people become friends out of necessity, shared struggle, and laughter in hard times. By the time we were 32, we had started a small logistics and warehousing company together. Just the two of us, one used truck, and a phone that rang maybe twice a week. By the time we were 50, that company had 400 employees, 3 warehouses across 2 states, and contracts with some of the largest retail companies in the country. We had built something real, something from nothing, and through all of it, Raymond was beside me, at my wedding when I married my beautiful wife, Catherine. When my son Daniel was born, when my daughter Linda came into the world 2 years later, Raymond was there. He was the godfather of both my children. That's who he was to me, not just a business partner, not just a colleague. He was family. Music fades slightly, tone becomes heavier, but somewhere along the way, something changed in Raymond, and I didn't see it. Or maybe I did see it, and I just refused to believe it, because when you love someone like a brother, you give them every benefit of the doubt until the doubt becomes impossible to ignore. Let me tell you about my family, because they are important to this story. My wife Catherine is a soft-spoken woman with a strong spine. She worked as a school librarian for 30 years and raised our 2 children with patience and grace. She is the kind of woman who never raises her voice but can silence a room with just one look. My son Daniel is 41 now. He is smart, well-dressed, and ambitious. He joined the company 12 years ago and quickly became the head of operations. He had good instincts for business, my Daniel. I was proud of him, but Daniel had a weakness. He liked money more than he liked patience. He wanted everything faster. He used to say, "Dad, you're too slow. The world doesn't wait for humble men anymore." I used to just smile and say, "The world has always waited for good men, Daniel. You just have to be patient enough to see it." He never really agreed with me. His wife, Sandra, my daughter-in-law, was a beautiful woman with sharp eyes and sharper opinions. She came from a wealthy family and never quite hid the fact that she thought she had married below her. Not below Daniel, below the image she had of what Daniel should become. She was always pushing him, always whispering in his ear, always making him feel like he needed more. My daughter Linda was different. She was gentle like her mother, thoughtful, and she lived in Seattle with her husband Marco and their 2 kids. She didn't work in the company. She was a teacher, and honestly, part of me was glad she had chosen a life away from all of it. And then there was Raymond, who I had trusted with the financial side of the business for years, because numbers were his gift, not mine. I was the operations man, the people man, the one who walked the warehouse floors and knew every worker by name. Raymond handled the accounts, the banking, the investments. I trusted him completely. That was my first mistake. No, wait, that's not right. Trusting a true friend is never a mistake. The mistake was not paying attention to when he stopped being a true friend. It started about 4 years ago, small things at first. Raymond bought a new house, a very large, very expensive house in a neighborhood where houses cost $3 million minimum. I congratulated him. He had always been good with his personal investments, I told myself. Then his wife started wearing jewelry that made Catherine quietly raise her eyebrows at dinner. Then Raymond started taking long trips, business development. He called them London, Dubai, Singapore. But when I asked which clients we were developing, he would wave his hand and say, "Nothing confirmed yet, George. I'll brief you when something is solid." I nodded. I trusted him. Daniel started coming to me with concerns about 6 months later. He sat across from me in my office and spread some papers on the desk. "Dad, I've been looking at the quarterly reports. Some of the numbers don't match the operational costs. There are wire transfers going to accounts I don't recognize." I looked at the papers. "I am not a numbers man, but I know enough to know when something looks strange. Have you talked to Raymond?" I asked. Daniel looked at me like I was a child. "Dad, the transfers are being authorized by Raymond. That's the problem." I was quiet for a long moment. "Let me handle it," I said finally. Daniel, let me handle it." He left my office frustrated. He thought I was being naive, that I was covering for my old friend out of misplaced loyalty. Sandra later told him, apparently, that I was a foolish old man who couldn't see past his sentiments. I heard about that comment. I didn't say anything. I just started paying attention more carefully. What I found over the next few months made my heart very heavy. Very heavy indeed. I hired a private financial investigator, quietly, without telling anyone, not Daniel, not Catherine, not a single person. His name was Mr. Ferris. He was a small, quiet man with glasses and a memory like a steel trap. He spent 8 weeks going through every account, every transaction, every wire transfer connected to the company over the past 3 years. When he came back to me with his findings, he sat down carefully, opened his briefcase, and placed a thick folder on the table between us. "Mr. George," he said, "I want you to be prepared for what I'm about to tell you. Just tell me," I said. He told me $70 million. Over the course of 3 years, Raymond had been systematically moving money out of the company. Shell companies in 3 different countries, fake vendor payments, inflated operational expenses, fraudulent investment accounts. $70 million. I sat very still. Mr. Ferris kept talking, explaining the method, the accounts, the paper trail. But I could only hear every third or fourth word, because there was a sound in my ears like rushing water. 40 years. We had been friends for 40 years. I was the best man at his wedding. I held his hand in the hospital when his first son was born. When his wife passed away from cancer 11 years ago, I sat beside him at the grave, and he cried on my shoulder like a child, and I cried too, because I loved him like a brother. And all that time, somewhere inside him, there was a door I had never been allowed to see behind. I thanked Mr. Ferris. I paid him. I asked him to keep everything confidential. He looked at me strangely. "Mr. George, don't you want to go to the police, or at least confront him directly?" I looked at him for a moment. "Not yet," I said quietly. "I need to understand the whole picture first." He nodded slowly, but I could see he didn't understand. That's all right. Most people wouldn't understand what I was doing. Pause. Music shifts slightly, because here is what nobody knew yet. Nobody knew that I had already been planning something for 6 months before I even hired Mr. Ferris. Nobody knew what I had quietly set in motion, and nobody, not Raymond, not Daniel, not Sandra, was ready for what was coming. While all of this was happening quietly beneath the surface, something else was happening on the surface that hurt me in a different way. My own family was beginning to pull away from me. It started with meetings I wasn't being invited to. Daniel and Sandra would have dinners with Raymond, discussing the company's future, and I would find out the next day from my secretary, who mentioned it casually, not knowing it was something I hadn't been told about. Your son and Mr. Raymond had a lovely dinner at the Hartwell last night. Sandra wore that green dress, you know the one. I smiled and nodded like I already knew. I didn't. Then one Sunday, the family came for dinner at our home, which had been a tradition for 20 years. After we ate, Daniel asked Catherine to take the grandchildren to the garden, and he sat at the table with Sandra and said to me very directly, "Dad, we need to talk about the future of the company." I put down my tea. Go ahead. You're getting older. You've been less involved. Raymond and I think it's time you consider stepping into a more advisory role. Let us run the day-to-day. I looked at him, then at Sandra, who was looking at the table with a small, satisfied expression, like a woman who had just watched her plan begin to work. An advisory role, I repeated. Dad, please don't make this difficult. It's just the natural progression. Raymond agrees. Raymond suggested this. Daniel paused just slightly too long. We discussed it together. I was quiet for a long moment. That silence, that particular silence of an old man who has just been shown something very painful, seemed to make Daniel uncomfortable. He shifted in his seat. Dad, say something. I'm just thinking, I said, and I was thinking about a night 30 years ago when this same company was 6 months from bankruptcy, and I had sold my car, my watch, and borrowed against our house to keep it alive. I was thinking about the nights I had worked until 2 in the morning, going over routes and contracts, while Catherine left dinner on the table and eventually went to bed alone. I was thinking about Raymond, standing in my kitchen that year, saying, "George, you and I are going to build something that lasts forever. I promise you, forever." I looked at Daniel and said, "I'll think about it." He seemed relieved. Sandra nodded like the matter was settled. It was not settled. Over the following weeks, things got worse. Sandra stopped pretending to be interested in my opinions at dinner. When I spoke, she would sometimes look at her phone. When I mentioned something about the company, she would say things like, "Yes, but that's how things were done before. The market has changed." My son, my own son, would not correct her. The one time I gently said, "Sandra, I'd appreciate it if you'd let me finish my thought." She looked at me with cool eyes and said, "Of course, George, I didn't mean to interrupt," but her tone said something completely different. And Daniel said nothing. That hurt more than anything Raymond had done. A stranger can betray you, and you can process it. You can file it under people are sometimes terrible and move on. But when your own child sits across from you and watches someone disrespect you and says absolutely nothing, that is a different kind of wound. It goes somewhere deeper. It sits somewhere quieter. I went home that evening and sat in my chair by the window for a very long time. Catherine brought me tea and sat beside me without saying anything for almost an hour. That's what makes a good marriage, knowing when words are the wrong tool. Finally she said softly, "George, what are you going to do?" I looked at her. "What I always do. I'm going to be patient, and I'm going to be prepared." She searched my eyes for a long moment, and then she nodded slowly, because after 40 years of marriage, she knew that when I spoke in that tone, something had already been set in motion that no one could see yet. Now I need to tell you something, and this is the part of the story that most people don't expect. When I first noticed the financial discrepancies, almost a year before I hired Mr. Ferris, I didn't panic. I didn't rush, and I didn't confront Raymond. Instead, I made a phone call to a man named Henry Aldridge. Henry Aldridge is one of the most respected corporate attorneys in the state. He is also, as it happens, an old college friend of mine from before I even met Raymond. We had stayed in touch over the decades, the way men of a certain generation do Christmas cards, occasional lunches, the kind of friendship that is quiet but deep. I told Henry everything I suspected. I told him I needed to be careful, methodical, and completely airtight before I made any move. I asked him to help me build something. What Henry and I built over the next 12 months was this. First, we quietly restructured certain assets of the company, moving them into a separate legal entity that I personally controlled, which was perfectly legal and above board, using mechanisms that Raymond either didn't know about or didn't monitor carefully enough. This protected the core of what the company was worth from any further drainage. Second, Henry worked with an independent auditing firm completely outside our normal channels to document and trace every single fraudulent transaction Raymond had made, creating a legal record that was undeniable. Third, and this is the part that required the most patience, we let Raymond believe everything was going according to his plan. We let him think the accounts were still accessible. We let him think the company was still structured the way he thought it was. We let him think he was months away from the final phase of whatever exit strategy he had planned. We let him keep walking toward the edge, because we had already quietly removed the ground on the other side. But there was one more piece, one more thing that I had arranged, and it involved the papers. It was a Tuesday morning in October. The leaves were turning. I remember that because I had driven to the office slowly that morning, watching the trees along the highway, thinking about how every ending looks beautiful from a distance. Raymond called a meeting, just the three of us, him, Daniel, and me. He said it was about transitioning ownership structure for tax efficiency purposes. Daniel had been told this was the moment they would formally begin the process of reducing my role and consolidating control between themselves. Sandra had apparently told Daniel the night before, "Tomorrow is the day your father finally steps aside and lets you be the man you were meant to be." Daniel told me this much later. With great shame, I walked into the conference room in our main office, the big one with the long table and the windows that look out over the city. I had sat in that room hundreds of times. I had signed 100 deals in that room. I had once cried in that room, alone, late at night, when we almost lost everything, and I didn't want Catherine to see my fear. Raymond was already there. He was wearing a very expensive suit. He looked tanned from his last trip. He smiled when I walked in, that wide, easy smile I had known for 40 years. "George, good morning, brother, brother." He still called me brother. I sat down. Daniel came in a few minutes later, coffee in hand, not quite able to look me in the eyes. Raymond placed a document on the table in front of me. "George, this is a standard restructuring agreement. It essentially formalizes the transition of your operational authority to Daniel, with a comfortable equity arrangement that keeps you involved as chairman emeritus." I looked at the document. I did not read it. I already knew what was in it, because Henry had obtained a copy 3 weeks earlier through legal channels. What the document actually did, beneath its careful legal language, was transfer my remaining controlling shares into a holding structure that Raymond controlled through his shell company network. It would have made me, for all practical purposes, an owner in name only. Figurehead with no real power and no legal ability to investigate or reverse the financial drainage that had already happened. It was, in simple terms, the final move, the checkmate. Raymond placed a pen on top of the document and smiled at me. "I know this is hard, George. Change is always hard. But this is the right thing for the company, for Daniel, for your legacy." I looked at the pen. I looked at the document. I looked at Raymond. And then I looked at Daniel, who was staring at the window, jaw tight, looking like a man who wanted to be somewhere else. I picked up the pen. I signed the document. Pause, silence, no music. Raymond let out a breath he had been holding. He reached over and took the document, checked my signature, and a smile spread across his face. "Thank you, George, truly. I know that wasn't easy." I put down the pen. "No," I said quietly, "it wasn't." And then there was a knock on the conference room door. 3 people walked into that conference room. The first was Henry Aldridge, carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who has been quietly waiting a very long time to say something. The second was a woman named Agent Patricia Morse, from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Unit of the FBI. The third was a young man from the independent auditing firm, carrying a document box. Raymond's smile did not disappear immediately. It sort of froze, like a photograph taken at the exact wrong moment. "George, who are these people?" Henry sat down at the table and opened his briefcase. "Good morning, Mr. Cole. I'm Henry Aldridge, Mr. George's legal counsel. I believe you've heard of me." Raymond looked at me. His smile had now fully died. "George, what is this?" I didn't answer right away. I let Henry do what Henry does. "Mr. Cole, the document you just had signed is not valid, and I'll explain why. The signature my client just provided matches a document we have already filed with the court this morning. A document that formally designates that signature as part of a prepared legal performance, executed under documented conditions. In other words, Mr. Cole, that signature does not do what you think it does." Raymond's face had gone slightly gray. "I don't understand." Agent Morse stepped forward and placed a separate set of documents on the table. "Mr. Raymond Cole, I have here a federal civil complaint and a referral for criminal investigation related to wire fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty in the amount of approximately $70 million. These documents are already filed. If you'd like to look at them, you're welcome to." Daniel, who had been sitting completely still, knocked over his coffee cup. Nobody moved to clean it up. Raymond looked at me, really looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something I had never seen in 40 years. "Fear, George," he said, and his voice was different now, thin, almost fragile. "George, let's talk about this. Just the two of us. We can work this out. We've always worked things out. We're brothers, George." "We're brothers," that word again. Brothers. I stood up slowly. I am not a large man, and at 67 my back gives me trouble, and I move carefully. But in that moment, I felt completely still inside, in a way that I think surprised everyone in the room. I looked at Raymond for a long moment, and then I said something that I had been carrying inside me for a very long time. "Raymond, do you remember what you said to me the night your wife died? I was sitting next to you on the porch of your house at 2 in the morning, and you said, 'George, you're the only real thing in my life. If you ever betrayed me, I don't think I could survive it.'" Raymond said nothing. His eyes were wet. "I never forgot that, and for 40 years I never did betray you, not once, not in small things, not in large things. I never took what wasn't mine. I never talked about you behind your back. I never put my interests over yours." The room was absolutely silent. "So when I found out what you had been doing, the part that nearly broke me wasn't the $70 million, Raymond. It was the fact that you had sat across from me at my dinner table, looked at my grandchildren, eaten my wife's food, and smiled at me while you were doing it. That was the part I couldn't understand." Raymond put his face in his hands. "George, I'm sorry. I know you're sorry now," I said. "You're sorry because you've been caught. That's a different thing than being sorry for what you did." I turned to Daniel. My son was staring at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Something between shock and shame, and something else, something that looked almost like seeing me clearly for the first time in a long time. "Daniel," I said gently, "I love you, that never changes, but I need you to understand something. The reason I didn't tell you what I was doing, the reason I handled this quietly, alone, was not because I didn't trust you. It was because I needed to know who you were going to choose to be when the moment came, and I still need to see that." His jaw worked. His eyes were red. "Dad, I didn't know he was stealing." "I believe you," I said. "But you did know that you were helping to push your father out of what he built, and you did know that Sandra's opinion of me was unkind, and you said nothing." He looked at the table. "That's the conversation we need to have, not today, but soon. I'm not going to pretend that what came next was clean or simple. Real life never is. Raymond was formally investigated. Henry had built a case that was substantial and well. documented. Raymond's attorneys, and he hired very expensive ones, managed to negotiate a settlement that avoided a criminal trial, but it involved the return of all recoverable funds, the liquidation of significant personal assets, and a permanent bar from serving in any fiduciary capacity in a corporation. He lost the big house, he lost the investments, he lost almost everything he had accumulated in those 3 years. But the thing he told me privately, in a brief meeting we had with our lawyers present, was that the worst part was not the money. The worst part was his children, his 2 grown sons, who had looked at him differently since that day. His eldest son stopped calling him for 3 months. That, Raymond told me, was the real punishment. I didn't say anything in response. What could I say? As for Daniel, my son, the healing between us was slow, and it was real. He came to my house about 2 weeks after that conference room meeting. He sat across from me in the living room, and for the first time in maybe 5 years, it was just the 2 of us, no Sandra, no phones on the table. He talked for a long time about pressure, about feeling like he was never enough, about Sandra, about Raymond, who had been slowly filling his ear with ideas about the company's future, ideas that always had Daniel at the center and me gently on the periphery. He used me, Dad, Daniel said. Raymond used me. He made me feel like I was finally stepping up, and the whole time he was using me as a shield. I know, I said. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me? I thought about this carefully before answering. Because, Daniel, if I had come to you with my suspicions, you would have had to make a choice, and I wasn't sure which way you'd choose. Not because you're a bad man, you're not, but because you were confused and pressured, and because you'd been listening to the wrong voice for a long time. I needed to remove the situation before asking you to choose, so that when the choice came, it was clear. He was quiet for a long time. And Sandra, he asked finally. I looked at him steadily. That's between you and Sandra. She is your wife. I will not tell you what to do in your marriage, but I will say this. A person who cannot respect your father will eventually not respect you. That's simply how the arithmetic of character works. He nodded slowly. Things between Daniel and Sandra became complicated after that. I won't share more than that, because it is their story to tell, not mine. But I will say that the last time I had dinner with my son, he laughed more freely than he had in years. And Sandra was polite in a way that felt genuine rather than performed. People can change, not always. But sometimes, my daughter Linda flew in from Seattle as soon as she heard. She sat with me and Catherine and cried a little, and then made tea and said, Daddy, how are you really? I'm all right, sweetheart, I said. Are you angry? I thought about it honestly. I was sad more than angry. Anger is loud. Sadness is quiet. I had a lot of quiet for a while. She held my hand for a long time. Catherine, for her part, had known more than she ever let on. That's my wife. She had seen the signs in Raymond years before I admitted them to myself, but she had trusted me to handle it in my own time. When I finally told her the full plan, she had listened carefully, and then said, I have one question. Is it legal? Completely. I said. Then good, she said. Now let's have dinner. 40 years of marriage. That's what it looks like. After everything settled, after the lawyers finished and the investigations concluded, and the family slowly began to breathe normally again, I spent a lot of time by myself in the early mornings. Sitting in my chair by the window with my tea, I thought about what the experience had taught me. The first thing I learned is this: silence is not weakness. For most of that year, people around me thought I was a tired old man who couldn't see what was happening in front of him. Raymond thought I was too sentimental to act. Daniel thought I was too slow. Sandra thought I was irrelevant. None of them understood that silence, when it is deliberate, is one of the most powerful things in the world. A man who is quiet when he is being underestimated is not passive, he is patient, and patient men, in my experience, tend to win the things that matter. The second thing I learned is harder to say. I had failed Raymond in a way, not by doing anything wrong, but by not paying enough attention to the changes in him over the years. The new house, the trips, the way his humor became slightly sharper, and his eyes became slightly more calculating. These were signs of a man who had started wanting something that our friendship and our company couldn't give him fast enough. If I had paid more attention, had more honest conversations with him earlier, not accusatory ones, but real ones, the kind we used to have when we were young and broke and had nothing to hide, maybe things would have been different. I don't know, maybe not. Greed has its own engine once it starts running. But I sat with that possibility for a while. It seemed right to. The third thing, a man's truest character is not shown in his success. It is shown in how he treats the people who have nothing left to offer him. Raymond treated me like a liability when he thought I had become one. Daniel almost did the same, but I had raised Daniel, which meant that somewhere inside him there was still the boy who used to fall asleep in the back seat of my old truck after long drives, and who once cried on my shoulder when his dog died, and who told me, when he was 16, that he wanted to be like me when he grew up. That boy was still there. He just needed the confusion to clear. And the fourth thing, perhaps the most important, what you build with honesty cannot truly be taken from you. Not permanently, not completely. Raymond took $70 million, but he could not take 40 years of knowledge, relationships, and reputation. He could not take the loyalty of every worker who had ever been treated fairly by our company. He could not take the foundation. Because I had built the foundation right, and when the structure shook, the foundation held. I am 67 years old. I have rough hands and a bad back, and I drink too much tea, and I take too long to answer questions because I like to think before I speak. I am not a dramatic man. I don't like confrontation. I would rather have peace than victory most of the time. But I have learned slowly, painfully, and at significant cost, that there are moments in life when the most loving thing you can do for the people around you is to be completely, calmly, and utterly unmovable, not out of stubbornness, not out of ego, not out of revenge, but because the truth deserves a witness who won't flinch. If you are watching this and there is someone in your life who is taking from you not just money, but your dignity, your voice, your sense of worth, I want to say this to you. You don't have to be loud to be strong. You don't have to be in a hurry to arrive at the right place, but you cannot afford to abandon yourself. Not for friendship, not even for family. Because the moment you decide that your worth is negotiable, that your years of sacrifice and love and building can simply be handed away to keep the peace, you set in motion a kind of slow disappearance that is very hard to come back from. Respect yourself quietly, consistently, even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. As for Raymond, the last I heard, he had moved to a smaller town. He had reconnected with his sons slowly. He had started doing volunteer bookkeeping for a nonprofit, which I found quietly appropriate. I have not spoken to him since the day with the lawyers, but I hold no hatred for him. That would be like carrying a stone in my chest for the rest of my life. And I have already given enough of myself to that story. I let it go, and in letting it go, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace, real peace. Not the false peace of pretending, not the quiet of a man who has given up. The peace of a man who knows who he is, knows what he built, and knows that no one, not even his oldest friend, can take that from him. Music swells softly. Camera returns to the old man at the wooden table, but now he is smiling slightly, looking out the window. Catherine walks in and places her hand on his shoulder. He puts his hand over hers. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of someone, or something you've been through, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, because every week we bring you stories like this one, stories about real people, real pain, and real strength. You are never alone in what you're facing. See you in the next one.